Hey mate, how you going? I've got a thought and an article I'd love to discuss again. Um, you and I have discussed AI and my concerns about it atrophying skills. And one of the recent posts I put on LinkedIn and something I've discussed with you prior is how I kind of liken some of these AI tools to Google Maps, jeopardizing our navigational ability. And this article really dives into that whole idea of, is AI, are these LLMs actually jeopardizing our ability to think? So love to get your take on this article that is called Your Brain on ChatGPT.
Okay, great. Yeah. So we've got a couple of articles here, right? We've got the Your Brain on ChatGPT, and then we've got an interesting response article actually as well, against brain damage, which sort of talks about maybe some of the less explosive clickbait type components of the study. Before we get into that, though, talk to me a bit about navigation, right?
Yeah,
We've talked about this as an issue, right? Those of us who grew up in a pre-mobile phone era are used to having little bits of paper stuck
yeah,
on the dash, trying to work out where we're supposed to be
that's it.
going.
Little
Um,
bookmarks.
right. I don't think I've done that for 20 years. So, how do you feel about that? Is that a good thing? Are we worried about this?
Well, so I think that's a great question. That's kind of where all of this started. So I vividly remember a time, and I remember exactly where I was. I remember being in Queensland with a friend of mine and our partners at the time, and I was driving in a rental car from the Gold Coast to Hope Island in Queensland. Never been there before, and my best mate at the time told me and acknowledged how good a navigator I was, and he'd always said, "You're such a good navigator. You don't need a map or anything to know where you are." And I think it was true. I think for a large part of my early life, I was a really good navigator. Was in the Boy Scouts as a kid, and I think that was a skill that I had and certainly honed. And now I can't tell you how untrue that is. I barely can find my way out of a paper bag, and I blame it entirely. I mean, I'm to blame, but I blame it entirely on my usage of Google Maps. Now I get in the car, even if I know exactly where I'm going, I'll still flick on Google Maps to get me there, with the thought that maybe, even though I know the route, it might give me a traffic-free version, or it might help me avoid something that a delay. And I am convinced that my navigational ability has been really weakened as a result of my reliance on Google Maps.
Yeah, I mean, it probably has. Right? There's research that actually suggests that is what's happened
Yeah.
to us.
Yeah.
There's even a related article linked off from one of these that talks about the fact that we're apparently objectively just not good at remembering phone numbers
Yeah.
anymore,
That's it.
because it's not a skill we need to practice because, they're 3 letters away in your phone and you have them there. Um, but I mean, there's an interesting corollary to that, right? I don't think I was ever especially gifted at navigation. I was particularly bad at reading out instructions because I always told people to turn left, even if I meant right. It's a much worse version of Google Maps,
A
frankly.
Zoolander, just a left only turner. Very good.
Correct. Um, and but I think there's an interesting argument to be made there. Does it matter that you're not a good navigator anymore?
I think that is a really good question. I think in the case of navigation, right now, probably not. I think unless all of the global satellites go down and we're thrust into the dark ages through some massive electromagnetic pulse weapon or something, I think we're probably okay relying on Google Maps for the most part. So I agree. The loss of my navigational ability, my loss of my ability of memorizing my wife's phone number is not something that bothers me, because it is something that I don't know was ever particularly valuable a skill in my lifetime, at least anyway. Um, but I do think that is the right question to ask when we look at the opposite, or the alternative idea here, which is the use of AI and these LLMs jeopardizing something more important than our ability to memorize numbers or navigate?
Right, and that's exactly what these articles are about, right? So, the first one is the famous MIT study now, which looked at the performance of students in essay writing tasks after using ChatGPT and how they performed later. And the kind of headlines around this article all said, I mean, they didn't literally say it's causing brain damage, but there was this sort of implication that's what we're doing. I think that the against brain damage piece provides a really nuanced take on that,
Yeah,
which is
agree.
obviously there's no literal brain damage, but we are actually dealing with these things differently. Um, and it comes down, I think, to this issue of, what tasks are we shortcutting? So in the case of Google Maps or Apple Maps, or shortcutting navigation. And we're quite happy to say, look, in the current era, that's probably not that useful a skill. Um, we're unlikely to get dropped in the middle of a forest other than on a weekend activity and need to find our way out of it, right? Um, but what becomes quite interesting then is we touch on the use of these tools in the workforce or in learning, and some of the things they're starting to shortcut are starting to look like things we actually want to be able to do regardless.
Well, and here's the point. This is it, and this is where, as you say, the article is comparing three groups, and they talked about a group using no technology to write an essay, one using Google, and one using ChatGPT. And the headline of the article, as you say, was essentially lower levels of cognitive engagement as you went from no technology to Google and then to ChatGPT, and lower levels as you went up. So yeah, as you say, what's the problem? And it's this notion of the down the track, the cognitive load was correlated with how much they felt a sense of ownership of the outcome, the essay they wrote, but also their ability to recollect what it was they were writing about, what they learned during the process. So those without using technology learn to remember much more for the sense of ownership, and those using ChatGPT much less. So the point there is kind of obvious. We use these technologies to offload some of the cognitive horsepower required, and it's muddled more in my head because the objective quality of the essay, the output, was better when you started using these AI tools. Now there was kind of a diminishing point of return, and I think that's where we should talk about today is how do we use these tools well, because there is a way of using them well. But the output of these essays with the use of LLMs was better than those that weren't augmented with LLM or Google. So it's a real tough one to kind of go, I know I'm not going to, I'm not going to feel like this is mine. I'm not going to learn as much potentially, but the outcome, the thing that I'm actually producing, is going to be better because I'm giving so much of the work to this technology, in this case, ChatGPT.
Well, and this again then comes down to the purpose, right? So the outcome of the navigation is better. That's all that I care about.
Yeah,
I don't need
100%.
to feel engaged in the process of getting there. In fact, I feel quite satisfied with the process
Yeah.
having gotten there more quickly or more efficiently, right? I think, this is an arbitrary essay test. Maybe it has meaning, maybe it doesn't. But then I think when we start to look at how we then bring that into other use cases. So the Against Brain Damage article has one of my favorite examples of this. Actually, they talk about the increasing use of AI tools in meetings,
Yep. Yeah.
and meetings to summarize the content of the meeting, and then potentially to get a summary of a meeting you never attended in the first place. And what I really love, the question they ask is, well, did the meeting need to take place, given that the purpose really of humans interacting is to create or discuss or to generate ideas or to look at kind of creative tension? If all of that can be reduced to a simple summary, it probably should have been in an email or a Slack message or a Teams note in the first place, right?
Well, 100%. And the number of meetings that I have either recorded like this or had summarized, the number of those meetings that have been sent to me that I've then watched or read summaries of myself, count them on zero fingers. Like I've never once have I watched a meeting back after the fact. And I'm sure there are exceptions to the rule here. But this goes to something else that I know we've both talked about before, is a lot of the use cases for AI are really low value. Like we're getting these tools to do things that are kind of, we talked about bullshit jobs last time briefly, but are kind of in themselves bullshit jobs, don't need to be done anyway. This just makes bullshit jobs easier to do. We're kind of going, there's not really much value generated yet. I think that yet is important there. Um, but if we get into the habit, and that's kind of one of my concerns here is if we become habituated to relying on these tools, what does that jeopardize? And that's the thing. The purpose piece you bring up is important. I think you're right. Um, but if we're saying that the the way we're using ChatGPT and these other tools is to augment our thinking, um, is our critical thought, is our creativity, is that a skill that we're willing to let atrophy? Um, I have a different view on that than I do navigation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the word there is augment. I think if we're augmenting, that's fine. If we're replacing, that's entirely different. But I just want to touch on something you said there about, using AI in low value activities. I think there's an interesting addition there that perhaps what we're doing is taking what could have been a high value activity and turning it into a low value activity because of how we're using AI in that interaction. So, for example, if we think the purpose of the meeting is now simply to generate a transcript, even subconsciously, then we've taken what might have been a creative process of people interacting and turned it into a low value activity. Um, to the extent that people will not come because they can simply read the transcript, whether they do or not, or whether they pass the transcript into another summarization tool to get an even shorter transcript,
Well, this
is
is
sort
it.
of irrelevant, right?
And you see this happening in tertiary education, in universities. When you and I went to uni, we went to face-to-face lectures, and every lecture, if you
When we couldn't get away with not going, we went face to
well,
face.
exactly. But if you didn't go, you didn't hear what was said. There was in my I went to Monash Uni and studied science. There was no recording, audio or video, of my lectures when I went to uni. No, I'm not saying recording and having those available for those who can't get there is a bad idea. But I still do some guest lecturing at Monash now, and I know that in many courses, it's 1/10 of their lectures are delivered now face to face. Most of them are online and often just repeats of previous years. And you kind of, to your point, you've taken what was a really high value element of the university experience and degraded it to I'm listening to a lecture while I'm watching a YouTube video while I'm Facebooking or Instagramming over here, and you've taken something that was high value, at least in some ways, and really jeopardized the value that anyone can extract from it.
And that's a whole other topic. What is the purpose of a tertiary institution now if we've abrogated responsibility for the in-person experience they used to curate and turned it into some low value kind of content, which I think most lecturers and professors would tell you is not really how they see their value. Um, but there is a kind of natural consequence of that. Okay, so before we wrap up, can I bring up a few kind of positive aspects, right? A
Yeah,
few like
yeah,
how we do this stuff really successfully. Some of these are mentioned in the article. Um, and if I can start us off with meetings, I think one of my, again, really love the section on meetings. There's also a section on meetings in there, which has an extract from a World War II guide to sabotaging officers for civilians. And the set of instructions for how you should sabotage meetings sounds like a lot of meetings I've attended in the past. So we'll put that description in the comments because it's a lot of fun. But what they talk about is saying something like, for example, rather than using AI as a end goal summarization or, heaven forbid, an AI representation of yourself, so you're not even in the context. They talk about using carefully curated prompts so that the AI is actually like a facilitator mid-meeting, creating some like customized cards to kind of guide the discussion. So it'll take the live transcript, which we can do now, which is really cool, and then turn it into, hey, for the collected membership, why don't we think about A, B, and C? Now, you could argue that a gifted facilitator can do that anyway, but a lot of the time the meetings are meetings we're in, not ones we're facilitating. And so, if you've got a group of 5 senior executives in a business and they're thinking about a deep problem, it's kind of cool to think about, building in that facilitation role to
absolutely.
increase the value of the outcome, right?
I totally agree, and I think that that's one of the eternal problems of being a facilitator is it's really hard to be both in and on the problem. So I think that's a really good use case. And I think you bring up a really good example of using AI in that context is a collaborative technology. And this is a pairing I've heard. We're using AI as a collaborative or a competitive technology. So a collaborative technology is one like a calculator. It actually makes you smarter. A mathematician with a calculator is better at maths than a mathematician without a calculator. Um, Google Maps is a competitive technology. Using Google Maps actually makes you worse at navigation, as we said. Doesn't mean that the outcome is worse, but makes you worse. So the problem with AI, ChatGPT, et cetera, is they want to be competitive technologies. They're designed to be competitive technologies. Just before this call, I actually went on to ChatGPT and asked it just to help prompt a learning. I asked it to design a learning program with me. And at the end of the learning program, gets down at the end. It gives me all this. Would you like me to create this is a slide deck outline or a facilitator guide with scripted notes? And it takes a Herculean effort to not say yes to it doing the work for you. So it's programmed to be a competitive technology. So I think, to your point, how can we use a competitive technology to become collaborative or in a collaborative way to augment our ideas rather than compete against them? I think that meeting was a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think there's a human discipline that's going to be required for us to continue to get better as people rather than take that very easy to follow kind of path of least resistance that the models are designed to create for us. But that said, I think if we build out sensible workflows, and this applies whether you're learning something, whether you're teaching something, whether you're coaching people, uh, this is where we can get really practical about how to actually lead an improvement and create increased kind of coherence in our own work using these tools
Yeah.
to collaborate, right?
That's it. That's it. And I think if we're going to kind of create that notion of workflow, I think is right. And to go, where in my workflow should AI play a part? And for me, I think the answer is almost always later than you imagine. Do all let the cognitive work happen as unencumbered as possible by technology. Do the generation, do the idea generation, the creativity in the absence of technology as best you can. And only when you've done that, then go to some of these tools and have them help you put a bit of polish on it and minimize that time at those later stages. Because the other thing that I've heard come up is this anchoring bias. So we go to ChatGPT and say, give us 5 examples to do this. All of a sudden, you've totally outsourced the ideas, and you'll be wed to those because they're the first things you've heard. Even if you try and do some creative thought on those initial ideas, you'll be wed to those as kind of anchors initially. So do your thinking first, then get the AI tools that you prefer to weigh in and put a bit of polish on with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, part of the conclusion of that article actually speaks to that as well. I think they say, think first, write first, meet first, then bring the tooling in, right? While it's easy to be kind of negative about the risks of this cognitive offloading, of us taking the easy way out, it does create those risks. But the joy of being human is that we have a choice in how we actually use those tools and how we interact with them.
Yeah, love it. Good on you. Well, I think there's more to talk about here. One of the things that I think comes out of this article is the importance of purpose and being deliberate in how you spend your time and use your time, and being deliberate in using these tools and aware of the risks, short term and longer term, that they potentially pose. And that's something I want to get into with or about maybe next time around. How can we both use AI productively, but how do we use AI to accelerate things like our ability to learn? If it gets in the way of our learning, how can we also use it to supercharge our learning efforts when needed?
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I look forward to that conversation and I'll chat to you then.
Sounds good. Cheers, mate. See you soon.